There are moments in life that end long before you realize they have. The day she learned about his betrayal was not the day her marriage died. It had been fading quietly for months, maybe years, like a photograph left too close to the sun. What remained was an image still visible, still recognizable, but already losing its colors. She woke now every morning with the same stillness, like the air before a storm that never comes. The coffee machine hummed, the scent filled the kitchen, and she moved through the space like a ghost still pretending to be human. Every movement had memory, and every memory carried weight. She had not left, but she was no longer there either. Sometimes she watched him across the table, and it felt like looking at a stranger wearing the face of someone she used to love. The shape of his shoulders, the rhythm of his breathing, the small scar near his wrist, all of it familiar, all of it hollow. She wondered how many lives two people could live together after the first one had already ended. Her friends would ask, without asking, if she was happy. Happiness had become a strange word, a kind of language she no longer spoke. There were good days, or at least days that were less sharp, days when the sun through the window touched her face gently enough that she could forget for a moment the ache inside her ribs. But the nights were different. The nights always remembered. When the house grew quiet and even the clock seemed to hold its breath, she felt the truth settle around her like fog. Betrayal is not a single wound. It's 1,000 tiny cuts that heal unevenly, reopening at the smallest touch. She did not tell him she knew. Maybe part of her feared the confirmation. Maybe she needed the illusion a little longer. She told herself it was for the children, for the family, for stability. But deep down she knew. She stayed because leaving would mean admitting how deeply she had been broken. Days turned into patterns: work, dinner, laundry, silence. Life has a way of continuing even when your heart refuses to move. She learned how to smile at neighbors, how to make polite small talk at the office, how to appear whole in a world that doesn't care for fragments. But inside, something was shifting. Slowly, quietly, a different version of herself was waking up. The version that had once believed love was meant to save her now began to wonder if love was meant to teach her instead. She started to see herself not as a victim, but as a witness. Someone standing at the edge of her own life, finally learning how to see. She began walking in the evenings, headphones on, moving through the rhythm of the city. The noise, the lights, the pulse of passing people, it all reminded her that the world was still big, that her pain was not the only thing that existed. Sometimes she caught her reflection in a window and did not look away. She had thought the hardest part would be forgiving him, but she was wrong. The hardest part was forgiving herself, for not seeing it sooner, for staying, for pretending, for believing that silence could be a kind of strength. She carried that shame like invisible armor. Weeks blurred into one another. There were mornings when she woke up and felt light, almost hopeful. Then there were mornings when she couldn't breathe, when the memory of what she had discovered pressed against her chest until she thought she might break. But she did not break. She endured. Endurance, she realized, is not weakness. It is a quiet defiance, a way of saying to the universe, I am still here. At work, she began taking on new projects, not because she cared, but because the distraction was easier than thought. Her boss noticed her focus, praised her discipline, but no one saw that she was just trying to stay ahead of the grief chasing after her. Her husband seemed relieved by her calmness. Maybe he thought the storm had passed. Maybe he believed she would never find out. Or maybe in some corner of his mind he knew she had, and that her silence was the punishment he could never escape. At night she lay beside him, inches apart, feeling the distance like a wall built of glass, transparent, invisible, but unbreakable. His breathing steadied into sleep, and she stared at the ceiling, thinking about how two people can share a bed and still live in different worlds. She no longer cried. Tears had done nothing but blur her vision, and she needed to see clearly now. Instead, she started to write. At first it was only phrases, fragments of thought, single lines scribbled on scraps of paper. Then the words began to form something larger, not a story, but a map back to herself. The words did not ask for pity. They did not seek revenge. They simply told the truth, piece by piece, until the truth no longer frightened her. Spring came again. The trees outside her window bloomed. The air smelled of rain and renewal, and for the first time she did not feel trapped by the season. She began to notice color again, the blue of the morning, the green of the leaves, the gold of late afternoon light. It was as if the world had quietly been waiting for her to return. And though she still wore her wedding ring, she no longer felt its weight. It had become just another ornament, a symbol of a promise that had already expired. One evening she found herself sitting at the edge of the bed, looking at the ring, thinking about what it once meant. The word forever echoed in her mind, but now it sounded fragile, almost absurd. Forever is a word people use when they believe endings belong to other lives. The night stretched out before her. She felt neither love nor hate, only the strange, steady calm of acceptance. She knew she would never be the same, but she no longer wanted to be. Something inside her had burned away, and in the ashes there was room for something new to grow. Outside, rain began to fall softly against the glass. She closed her eyes and listened. The sound reminded her that every storm eventually becomes music.
The rain fell all night, gentle and endless, as if the sky itself was trying to wash the world clean. She lay awake, listening to it, feeling something inside her loosen. For the first time in months, she was not counting her thoughts, not tracing every memory. She simply existed, breathing in rhythm with the storm outside. By morning, the city smelled new. She stood at the window, coffee in hand, watching the wet streets shimmer in the light. There was a strange clarity in the air, the kind that follows destruction. Renewal does not announce itself. It arrives quietly, disguised as an ordinary day. She went to work, greeted her colleagues, answered the same endless stream of emails. Yet under the surface, something had changed. The space that had once been filled with pain was now filled with awareness. She no longer asked why. The question had become irrelevant. Sometimes there is no reason that can satisfy a heart that has been betrayed. Sometimes the only answer is survival. She started paying attention to the small details she had once ignored. The sound of her shoes on the pavement, the warmth of the cup between her hands, the way sunlight broke across her desk. Life was still happening, and for the first time she was not watching it from behind glass. At home, their routines continued, like choreography learned long ago. But now, within the silence, she felt something new. Distance without fear. She was no longer afraid of the space between them. In that space, she found herself. Sometimes she imagined leaving, packing a suitcase, walking through the door, breathing in the sharp taste of freedom. But the fantasy no longer burned with urgency. It felt more like an option than an escape. She realized she could leave any time, and that knowledge, paradoxically, made her stronger in staying. She began to rediscover the texture of solitude. It was not emptiness, but possibility. She read books again, long into the night, her mind wandering through worlds untouched by betrayal. She cooked meals for herself, not for anyone else, tasting flavors she had forgotten to enjoy. There were moments of weakness, of course. There always are. Nights when loneliness crept in like smoke and memories returned with claws. But those moments no longer destroyed her. They passed, and she remained. Her husband seemed smaller now, not in stature but in power. His actions no longer defined the story. She had taken the narrative back. He was a chapter, not the whole book. She watched him move through their home, unaware of the revolution happening in silence beside him. One day, while cleaning the closet, she found the box of old photographs. Their smiles looked bright, innocent. She felt no anger looking at them, only gratitude for what was once true, even if only for a while. Every love has its season. Some end in winter, some in spring. But each leaves something behind, even if it is only the lesson of its fragility. Later that week, she sat on the balcony, watching the city lights flicker against the dark. She thought about all the women whose lives looked whole from the outside, but were filled with quiet wars inside. She thought about how many stayed, how many left, and how both decisions required courage. Healing, she realized, is not about forgetting. It is about learning to live alongside the memory without letting it consume you. She wrote again that night, but the words felt different now. They were not born from pain, but from clarity. She wrote about the ways people hurt each other when they are lost, about how love sometimes fails not from malice, but from fear. She wrote about how survival can be beautiful. When she finished, she looked around her apartment, the same walls, the same furniture, yet everything looked altered, touched by her awakening. The woman who had once lived here had been fragile, hopeful, dependent. The woman standing now was something else entirely. In the mirror, she saw not the girl who had once needed saving, but the woman who had saved herself. Months passed quietly. The rhythm of life returned, but she was no longer the same dancer. She began traveling alone, short trips at first, weekends by the coast, where she could walk by the sea and feel the wind against her face. The horizon reminded her that there were still infinite directions to go. She learned to sit with herself without fear, to be alone without being lonely, to love her own company in ways she had never known before. Sometimes she thought about him, not with love, not with bitterness, but with a kind of distant compassion. People break what they do not understand. He had broken her once, but in doing so, he had also broken open a part of her that was waiting to grow. She began to smile again, not the polite smiles she used to wear, but real ones, born from moments of unexpected joy, the warmth of sunlight on her skin, the laughter of a stranger, a song drifting from a passing car. These were small miracles, and she was finally awake enough to notice them. One evening, while walking home, she saw a couple holding hands. Something inside her ached, but gently. Love still existed in the world, even if hers had changed form. She did not envy them, she wished them well. That night, she removed her ring and placed it in a drawer. Not as a declaration, not as an ending, but as an acknowledgement. The story had already turned its last page. She was writing a new one now. In the quiet after, she sat by the window, listening to the hum of the city below. For the first time in a long while, she felt peace, not as absence, but as presence. A fullness made of acceptance. She understood now that healing is not a destination. It is a way of walking through the world slower, wiser, softer. The next morning she woke early, before dawn. The sky was pale, almost silver, and the first light touched the edge of her face. She stood in that light for a moment, breathing, feeling both fragile and infinite. And as she turned toward another day, she realized something profound. She had stayed not because she was afraid to leave, but because she needed to find herself before she could truly go. And now she knew she could. Outside, the city stirred awake. The noise returned. The traffic hummed. Life moved on. And so did she. The past no longer held her captive. It was just a landscape she had once walked through, familiar, distant, and no longer home. As she stepped into the morning, she carried no anger, no regret, only the quiet power of a woman who had faced the storm and found her own light on the other side. And now she wondered, as so many hearts must, what others would have done in her place. If you were her, if you found out the person you loved had betrayed you, would you have stayed long enough to heal? Or would you have walked away before you ever learned who you truly are?